carved for hiding. Some were cut to move things people weren't supposed to see. But this one took in 3 officers, and only one walked back out. Now, I can't hand you an official case file on this. You won't find it in any sheriff's log or county paper. What you will hear are the stories, the kind passed around by locals, whispered by folks who say they knew someone on the inside. Maybe it happened exactly like this, maybe it didn't. That part's not for me to decide. I'm just telling you how the story's been told. Some places carry a silence that feels older than the people living there. Red clay country down in southern Alabama has that kind of silence. You walk the back roads at night and hear the cicadas fade out all at once, like they know something's moving that you can't see. Folks out there don't need signs to tell them where not to go. They just know. There's one spot the locals whisper about, a tunnel cut into the earth, mouth wide and low, timber bracing long rotted away. Nobody remembers who dug it first. Some say it was used to stash liquor during Prohibition. Others swear it was a drainage cut that workers abandoned when it caved. Whatever the truth, it became a place kids dared each other to enter, the kind of thing that keeps its legend alive without anyone really knowing why. But in the spring, about 2 years ago, people started calling the sheriff's office. Not once, not twice, half a dozen calls. It wasn't the usual kids partying complaint. They said they'd heard screams echoing from the tunnel after dark. They'd seen flashlights moving inside, then vanish. A farmer swore he found boot prints in the clay leading in, but none coming back out. The sheriff wasn't the type to chase ghost stories, but with kids possibly involved, he couldn't ignore it. He grabbed 2 deputies, both men who'd grown up in the county, men who knew the stories but laughed them off. The 3 of them rolled out just after dusk, when the heat was lifting and the crickets were starting up. They parked on the shoulder of an unmarked dirt track, headlights catching the ragged outline of the tunnel mouth cut into the red clay wall. Standing there, the air felt wrong. Still. Too still. The woods behind them were alive with sound, but the closer you got to the opening, the quieter it became, like the earth itself was holding its breath. The sheriff mentioned it out loud, trying to pass it off as a joke, but no one laughed. The first thing they noticed were the tracks. Not just boot prints, though those were there, sunk deep into the damp clay. But there were others, broad, flat, claw-scored marks running parallel to the human prints. Whatever made them had weight. Too much weight to be a stray dog. Too heavy for a coyote. The trail led straight in. The deputies wanted to call it in right then, get more men, maybe even state wildlife. But the sheriff shook his head. 3 kids missing in this county already this year, he said. We're not waiting. He racked around into his shotgun, nodded at his men, and stepped into the mouth of the tunnel. The beam of his flashlight cut into the dark. The walls were rough clay, gouged by old tools, roots hanging down like fingers. The air was damp, cooler than outside, carrying a smell that hit them all at once. Metallic, sharp, almost like blood. One deputy gagged, hand over his nose. The sheriff kept walking. Every step inside felt heavier. The sound of their boots on the packed clay echoed too long, bouncing off walls that seemed to close in around them. 10 feet in, 20. The tunnel curved, and the light from outside was gone. It was just them, their beams, and the dark ahead. That's when they heard it. At first, it sounded like dripping water, a steady tap echoing somewhere deeper. But then it changed. Faster, rhythmic, like something clicking 2 stones together in a pattern. 2 taps, then 3 taps. The sound carried through the tunnel, bouncing back at them like it was alive. The sheriff raised his hand, signaling the others to stop. The clicking went silent. For a moment, all they could hear was the blood pounding in their ears. One deputy whispered, "That's not water." The sheriff didn't answer. He shifted the beam of his flashlight along the wall. The claw marks were deeper here, fresh gouges torn into the clay. He crouched, ran a hand across the ridges. The clay was damp, the edges sharp. Whatever made them had done it recently. Then the clicking started again. This time it wasn't in front of them. It was behind, All three spun, lights cutting back toward the mouth of the tunnel. Nothing, just the pale slice of night sky far down the passage. The sound had stopped again. "Keep moving," the sheriff said. His voice was steady, but his hand tightened on the shotgun. They pushed deeper, 30 feet, 40. The air grew colder, the metallic stink stronger. Now there were bones scattered along the floor. Small ones at first, raccoon, maybe a dog. Then bigger. A deer skull lay half buried in the clay. Antlers snapped like twigs. One deputy muttered, "What the hell would drag this in here?" The sheriff didn't answer. His beam caught something farther in. A scrap of fabric torn and mud-streaked, wedged against a root. He pulled it free. It was a sleeve from a hoodie. They'd all heard the rumors about kids sneaking into the tunnel. Now, it wasn't a rumor. The sheriff shoved the cloth into his pocket, jaw tight. "Keep moving." That's when the clicking came again. Louder this time. 2 taps, then 3. Then a pause. Then 2 more. It wasn't random. It was a signal. The deputies froze. One whispered, "Sheriff, we're not alone." The sheriff swung his light down the tunnel. For a second, the beam caught something. 2 points of reflection low to the ground, glinting like coins. Eyes. The shape was gone before any of them could focus. The sound of claws scraping clay followed, retreating into the dark. One deputy raised his pistol. The sheriff shook his head. "We're not firing blind. Stay tight." They pressed forward, the tunnel narrowing until the walls brushed their shoulders. Roots clawed at their hair and jackets. The floor sloped down. The air grew wet and foul, like a cellar left to rot. 50 feet in, the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. Their beams swept across rough walls in a pool of standing water. More bones lay scattered along the edges, half sunk in mud. In the corner, something shifted. The deputy's light locked onto it, scales glistening in the beam. A hunched shape pressed against the wall. The thing lifted its head. A face stretched long and narrow. Eyes too large, slit black down the middle. Its jaw open, showing teeth that weren't human. The deputies stumbled back. One shouted, gun raised, but the sheriff barked, "Hold!" The creature didn't lunge. It just crouched there, head tilted, watching. Then it made the sound again. 2 clicks, 3 clicks. This time, the echoes didn't come from behind them. They came from deeper inside the chamber. Another shape moved in the shadows. Then another. The sheriff's grip tightened on the shotgun. He knew what his men were thinking. This wasn't a rescue mission anymore. Whatever they'd stepped into, it wasn't just one thing in the dark. It was more. And then the clicking grew louder. Dozens of taps rolling over each other, echoing through the chamber until the sound became a wall pressing against their skulls. One deputy lost it. He fired. The blast thundered in the tunnel, deafening, dirt showering from the ceiling. The shape in the corner vanished into the shadows. Something hissed, low and sharp, from the other side of the chamber. The sheriff pulled his men back, shouting over the ringing in their ears, "Out, now!" They turned for the passage, but the tunnel behind them wasn't empty anymore. Shapes moved low and fast, scraping claws against clay as they closed the gap. That's when the sheriff realized the 3 of them weren't all getting out. The sheriff had seen plenty of bad situations in his career. Armed standoffs, meth labs gone sideways, even a shootout once on a county road. But nothing prepared him for the sight of those shapes crawling low through the clay. The beams of their flashlights caught flashes of scaled skin, claws digging into the floor, jaws too wide for anything that walked on 2 legs. They weren't charging yet. They were circling, hurting. The deputy who had fired first kept his pistol trained on the passage, his hands shaking so bad the beam of his light wavered across the walls. The other deputy was backing up fast, breath coming short, the panic rising off him in waves. The sheriff barked at them both, "Hold the line," but even his voice cracked. The sound came again, clicks rolling in rhythm, echoing through the chamber like dozens of metronomes ticking at once, some deep in the dark, some closer than they wanted to admit. The sheriff swung his shotgun in a wide arc, scanning every corner. Move toward the exit, slow, stay tight. They backed toward the tunnel mouth, boots slipping in the damp clay. One shape darted across the beam of light, a blur of muscle and scales. Another hissed, so close the air seemed to vibrate, and then one of them came out of the dark for real. It moved fast, too fast for something that size. It darted from the side, claws raking across the deputy's arm before vanishing back into shadow. The man screamed, gun smacked against the wall. His flashlight spun across the chamber, catching half a face for just a second. Scaled snout, slit eyes, teeth jagged like broken glass. The sheriff fired. The shotgun blast roared through the tunnel. Clay shattered from the wall, the sound bouncing back so loud it felt like the earth itself was splitting. Whatever he hit let out a shriek. Not human, not animal, something in between. The chamber filled with the sound, high and furious. The other shape surged forward, no longer circling. "Run!" the sheriff shouted. They bolted for the passage, boots pounding against clay. The injured deputy stumbled, clutching his bleeding arm. The sheriff grabbed him, dragging him forward. Behind them, claws scraped louder, faster, closing the distance. The tunnel felt narrower now, closing in on them. Flashlights swung wild as they sprinted, beams cutting across roots and claw marks and slick mud. The clicking hadn't stopped. It was everywhere now, front, back, side, like the creatures were in the walls themselves. Halfway to the entrance, one of the deputies screamed. The sheriff spun and saw him go down hard, dragged sideways into the dark. His light dropped, rolling across the clay. For a heartbeat, the beam caught it, a hand clawing for help, and then nothing but scales pulling him back into black. The sheriff fired again, shotgun blast lighting up the passage. The recoil nearly tore the gun from his hands, but there was no target left. Only the echo, only the ringing in his ears, only the sight of his deputy gone. The other deputy shouted, voice breaking, "We gotta go, we gotta go!" And the sheriff knew he was right. They tore forward, lungs burning, the tunnel mouth finally glowing ahead with the pale light of the outside night. Behind them, the clicking rose to a frenzy. Dozens of claws hammered the clay, each step closer, closer. And then the two of them burst into the night air, staggering onto the dirt track. The injured deputy collapsed, bleeding, gasping. The sheriff turned, shotgun raised at the tunnel mouth, ready for the creatures to come tearing out after them. But they didn't. The darkness stayed still. The sounds died as if a switch had been thrown. Not even a cicada sang. Only silence. The sheriff stood there, chest heaving, weapon trembling in his hands. And he realized what the locals had always said was true. Some places weren't meant to be entered. Some tunnels were carved for hiding things. And tonight, the tunnel had taken one of his men. The sheriff kept his shotgun trained on the mouth of the tunnel, sweat stinging his eyes. The younger deputy knelt in the dirt, clutching his mangled arm, blood dripping into the clay. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them breathed. And then they heard it. "Sheriff!" A voice, muffled, echoing from the black throat of the tunnel. Both men froze. "Sheriff, I'm here! Help me!" It was him. The deputy they'd just seen dragged under, his voice bouncing up from the dark. The younger deputy scrambled to his feet. "That's him! He's alive!" He staggered toward the opening, blood soaking his sleeve. The sheriff caught him by the shoulder. "Hold it!" His eyes never left the black. "That's not right." "Sheriff, please!" the voice cried again, clearer this time, desperate. The injured deputy tore free of the sheriff's grip. "We can't just leave him." He stumbled into the tunnel's mouth, flashlight beam trembling as it cut through the dark. The sheriff cursed, racked another shell into the shotgun, and followed. Just a few steps, just far enough for the night air to vanish again, swallowed by the damp silence. "Back here!" The voice was close now, too close. The sheriff raised his light. The beam cut through the narrow walls, catching clay and roots and nothing else. No deputy, no man reaching out, just the sound of boots scraping deeper in the dark. And then it came again. 2 clicks, 3 clicks, followed by a hiss. The sheriff's gut turned cold. He swung his light toward the sound, but the beam caught nothing but empty tunnel. The younger deputy turned back toward him, wide-eyed, mouth open to speak, when something snatched him from the side. A scaled arm, claws like knives, yanked him straight into the wall of shadow. His flashlight clattered to the ground, rolling end over end until it landed at the sheriff's boots. In its glow, he saw the smear of blood across the clay, the claw marks cutting deeper as the thing dragged him out of sight. The deputy screamed once, then the tunnel swallowed the sound whole. The sheriff fired, shotgun blast deafening in the close space, recoil slamming his shoulder. Dust rained from the ceiling. Nothing. Just his own echo coming back at him. And then silence. The sheriff snatched up the flashlight and staggered backward, his boots slipping on wet clay. His breath came in ragged gasps. He didn't stop moving until the pale slice of night showed again, and he burst out onto the dirt track alone. Now he really was alone. His hands shook as he fumbled the radio. Static. Dead. He cursed and sprinted for the cruiser, heart pounding in his throat. He shoved the injured arm of his jacket against his face, smearing sweat and clay, and jammed the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life. Only when the cruiser hit the highway did the radio come alive, dispatch crackling through like nothing had happened. The sheriff forced his voice steady. "Officer down. Repeat, officer down. Send backup to the ridge tunnel." By the time the first wave of cruisers arrived, the mouth of the tunnel looked different, a collapse. Clay and roots sagged inward, sealing the opening like a wound closing over. They shouted his deputies' names into the night. No answer. Dogs sniffed the dirt, whining, but wouldn't go near the blocked mouth. By dawn, spotlights lit the trees. They brought in an excavator clawing at the red clay. All day the machine worked, tearing, digging, dragging out dirt by the ton. And when the bucket finally scraped clear of the opening, nothing. No chamber, no bones, just solid earth. It was like the tunnel had never been there at all. The men at the site didn't want to stop. All night the excavator clawed at the ridge, its bucket chewing through tons of red clay, dragging it out in steaming piles. Deputies held spotlights high, their beams cutting through dust that hung in the air like smoke. The sheriff stood off to the side, his shotgun across his chest, clothes caked in mud and blood. He didn't say much. He just stared at the ridge. By sunrise, they had opened a pit 20 feet wide. Nothing but dirt, no chamber, no void, no trace of the tunnel he'd stumbled out of only hours before. The county brought in engineers. They shook their heads, talking about shifting ground and unstable formations. But even they looked unsettled when the sheriff told them the opening had been clear as day when he crawled out. So they kept digging. By afternoon, the excavator bucket hit something different. Not stone, not clay, hollow. The sound of metal against open space echoed up the slope. The operator cut the engine, climbed down, and wiped sweat from his brow. Everyone went silent. The sheriff stepped forward, boots sinking in the churned clay. He peered into the pit. A black opening yawned just below the surface, wide enough for a man to crawl through. This wasn't the same tunnel. It slanted sharper, lined with clawed gouges that hadn't seen air in years. The sheriff dropped a flashlight down, watched the beam bounce off walls, then vanish into a curve. One of the deputies muttered, "That ain't natural." They rigged a small robot with a camera, a unit the state police used for cave-ins and confined spaces. The thing looked like a toy tank, treads clattering as they lowered it into the hole on a tether. Its light cut across the walls, beaming the feed to a grainy monitor propped on a truck hood. The men crowded around, watching the camera crawl forward. At first it was just dirt, roots, and gouges. Then the tunnel widened. Bones showed up, not just animals this time. A human ribcage, half crushed, pressed into the wall like the earth had swallowed it. A boot sole, a torn belt. Someone cursed under their breath. Another man whispered the name of one of the deputies. The robot kept crawling. The feed shook, light jerking across uneven walls, until it hit a junction. The tunnel split, one branch sloping deeper, the other twisting sharp to the right. They followed the right fork. 70 yards from the original ridge face, the camera broke through into daylight. Gas went up from the men watching the screen. The tunnel had another mouth, hidden low in a thicket of pines, nearly invisible unless you stood right on top of it. From above, it just looked like a patch of brush, nothing more. But there it was, an exit, a second way in and out. The sheriff's stomach sank. He knew what that meant. If the creatures had pulled his men deeper, they hadn't been trapped. They'd had another way out. One of the younger deputies said it out loud. They could be anywhere. The sheriff shut the monitor off. His jaw tightened. Seal it, both sides. The order wasn't popular, but nobody argued. They hauled timbers, steel sheeting, poured quickset concrete. By nightfall, both mouths of the tunnel were blocked. Heavy fencing and warning signs went up. The ridge was declared off limits. Official report: unstable tunnel system, collapse danger, no recoverable remains. But the men who worked that dig knew better. They'd seen the claw marks. They'd seen the bones. They'd seen the camera feeds showing the tunnel cutting deeper into the earth than anyone wanted to admit. The sheriff retired a few months later. He moved out of state. The others stayed, but they didn't talk. They carried it in silence. And still the stories spread. Locals said if you walk near that ridge at night, you can still hear something under the ground.